You stopped calling. You stopped showing up to holidays. You let the birthday texts go unanswered. And when someone asks about your family, you change the subject or give a vague response that closes the conversation. From the outside, it might look cold, distant, even cruel. But here's the strange part. You don't feel cruel. You feel calm, maybe for the first time in years. And that calmness is what confuses you most, because you were told your whole life that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water, that walking away makes you the problem. So why does staying away feel like the first honest thing you've done? This isn't about anger. It's not revenge. It's not even about blame. Something quieter happened inside you. A door closed, and you didn't force it. You just stopped holding it open. If that's you, there's nothing broken here. Your brain didn't malfunction. Your heart didn't go cold. What happened is far more interesting and far more human than anyone told you it would be. Let's talk about why some people can walk away from family without guilt, and why that says more about survival than it does about character. The first thing to understand is that guilt requires a specific kind of emotional wiring. It needs a belief that you violated something sacred, something you still hold as true. But when someone grows up in a home where love was conditional, where affection was a reward system and withdrawal was punishment, the idea of family as sacred never fully forms. Not because you're broken, but because you were taught a different version of the story. You learn that closeness comes with cost. That connection requires performance. And eventually, your brain stopped associating family with safety. It associated it with work, with monitoring, with managing someone else's emotions just to keep the peace. When you walk away from that, there's no guilt, because you're not walking away from love. You're walking away from a job you never applied for. This is where attachment patterns come in. Children who grew up with unpredictable caregivers, parents who were warm one moment and cold the next, present one day and absent the next, often develop what's called avoidant attachment. Not because they don't want connection, but because they learned early that connection isn't stable. It can't be trusted. So they build a different operating system, one that relies on distance as protection, one that finds peace in solitude rather than closeness. And when they eventually cut ties with family, it doesn't feel like loss. It feels like returning to a place they already know, a quiet room they built for themselves a long time ago. Think of someone who leaves a job they hated for years. Their co-workers might mourn, the boss might guilt them, but the person who left, they feel lighter. Not because they didn't care, but because caring was costing them more than they had. Family can work the same way, especially when staying meant slowly disappearing. But here's the part nobody tells you. Guilt isn't the only emotion we expect from separation. There's also grief. And for people who cut off family without guilt, grief often came first, years before the actual distance. They grieved the parent who wasn't there, the sibling who chose sides, the dinner table that never felt safe. By the time they physically left, the emotional leaving had already happened. The tears had already been cried in private, often as a child, often alone. So when the final step came, the blocked number, the skipped holiday, the unanswered door, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt like the last sentence of a story that had already ended. There's also something important about how the brain processes repeated disappointment. When you expect someone to hurt you, and they do, the pain is still there, but it's duller, predictable, and over time, your nervous system stops reacting the way it used to. You stop hoping, not because you gave up, but because your brain gave up for you. It decided that protecting you from the next disappointment was more important than holding on to a relationship that kept wounding you. This isn't emotional shutdown. This is your mind learning what your heart couldn't accept, that some people will not change. And once you truly believe that, guilt loses its grip. Because guilt needs hope to survive. It needs the belief that things could have been different if you had just tried harder. But when you finally see the pattern clearly, when you stop blaming yourself for someone else's limitations, the guilt has nothing left to hold on to. This experience shifts as you get older. In your 20s, cutting off family might feel rebellious, even frightening. There's still a voice that says, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm being dramatic. But in your 30s, 40s, or beyond, that same distance feels different. It feels like clarity, not because the behavior changed, but because you did. You stopped measuring your worth by their approval. You stopped editing yourself to fit into rooms that were never built for you. And when that shift happens, the absence of guilt isn't suspicious. It's evidence that you finally trust your own experience more than their narrative. What often gets misunderstood is the role this distance plays in emotional regulation. Cutting someone off isn't about punishment. For many people, it's about survival. It's about removing a source of chronic stress that no amount of conversation could fix. Every phone call that left you drained. Every visit that took days to recover from. Every holiday that required a week of mental preparation. That's not connection. That's labor. And when you remove it, your nervous system finally gets to rest. You sleep better. You stop bracing yourself. The background noise in your mind gets quieter. That peace isn't cruelty. It's your body telling you that this is what safety actually feels like. There's a metaphor that fits here. Imagine you've been holding a door shut for years. Not because you wanted to, but because something on the other side kept pushing. You couldn't relax. You couldn't turn your back. All your energy went into that door. And one day, you stopped holding it. You let it close. You locked it. And for the first time, you walked into the center of the room. You sat down. You breathed. That's what cutting off family can feel like. Not an act of war, but an act of rest. Some people carry guilt like a badge of proof. If I feel bad, it means I'm still good. But guilt isn't a measure of morality. Sometimes it's just a residue of old programming, messages we absorbed before we had the language to question them. And when that guilt doesn't show up, it doesn't mean you're heartless. It might mean you finally shed a story that was never yours to begin with. So if you've let go of people you were supposed to hold on to forever, and you feel more like yourself than you have in years, that's not something to fix. That's not a flaw to examine. That's a sign that somewhere along the way, you chose yourself. Not out of cruelty, not out of spite, but because you finally realized that peace was possible, and you were allowed to have it. You're not the villain in this story. You're just someone who stopped performing and started living. And that's not cold. That's human.